So I'm Terry. I have a confession to make. I'm an Erlang guy. I have way more Erlang experience than Elixir. And some of you are thinking, what the hell is Erlang? And that's kind of what this talk is about. Um, so Erlang is the grandfather of Elixir, the great grandfather of Elixir. I, I hate to say father because father implies there's only one generational change. And while there's no generations between them, there is a massive developer generational change in Elixir that we'll talk about later. So Erlang is sort of what underlies Elixir, and it's a programming language that was developed at Ericsson in 1986 using Prolog as the original thing. And if you have any questions about Prolog, you can ask them, but I don't know anything about it, so I'll just say I don't know. And it was this is an important point. As a second point, it was designed for telephone switch hardware, not as a general language. So when the Ericsson guys developed it, they were not trying to develop a language for people to use. They were trying to develop a solution for their telephone switches. And this again becomes important later as you discover the things they didn't do to make it a full language and why Elixir now exceeds it. You'll recognize this as an Elixir thing. The focus was on concurrency, soft real-time, and hot code swapping. Hot code swapping is not something that we do a lot of these days. Containers seem to have taken place, and for good reason. Hot code swapping is the most terrifying thing you'll ever do in production. And then in the 90s, they sort of gave up on making it piggyback on other languages. They turned it into an actual language and runtime system for usage. And then they open sourced it in 1998 and gave it to the public. And this is where Elixir comes from. Let's move on. So I stole this from the Beam book. We'll talk about that later. So the Erlang system is like the Elixir system. You've got your apps that sit on top of OTP, that sit on top of the Beam, that sit on top of the Erlang runtime system, and then operating system and hardware. So this is the OTP and the Beam are really what make Erlang and Elixir special in the development world. The focus on easy concurrency without needing to worry about shared memory or mutexes or locks or any of those things I haven't thought of in a decade are really a freeing thing. So if you're not sure why people pick Elixir, this is one of the reasons. It's just you can do your concurrency and now parallelism without needing to panic about, is something going to block, or is something going to crash and take down my whole system? You know, how do I write these things to have them be thread safe? Because thread safety, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, was something we were constantly worried about, because you'd have these clients, you'd send out software and you'd have these clients with these multi-processor machines, and things would blow up all over the place, and you'd go, well, we can't afford to buy a multi-processor machine ourselves, so we'll have to borrow one from someone that has one. So yeah, remember this diagram. Well, remember these two things because they're important as well. Okay, so why would you care about Erlang? It's old. It's not popular. Has never been popular. Elixir has sort of replaced it. But so Elixir uses Erlang underneath the hood. So Elixir compiles to Beam bytecode, and it uses the OTP. So it isn't using the Erlang language, although you can use Erlang right within your code. But it is using the Erlang runtime system and all that stuff that was built up around Erlang. And when you have problems in Elixir, you will eventually say, oh, I have to go figure out what this Erlang stuff does because this is an Erlang problem. And so we come back to the Elixir system, and you'll notice that the An Elixir, when you run Elixir, this is almost exactly the same as Erlang, just with Elixir jammed in above OTP. Elixir is a layer within that adds on to the Erlang system. So everything is still the same as it would be in Erlang with the addition of this Elixir compilation, macros, and all the nice stuff you get with Elixir because it's a modern programming language. So the big problem with Erlang for a lot of people is just the way the code looks. Can you read that on that background? Is it too bright? People look at Erlang code, and we'll go to a worse slide in a minute, and they see all these dots at the end of lines and semicolons, and we don't have any commas at the end of lines here, but a normal line in Erlang has a comma at the end, which irritates a lot of people. So Erlang was developed before there is a settling on C-like syntax. Again, this is Prolog syntax for the most part. So yeah, it doesn't end lines in semicolons. It doesn't have nice little brackets around everything like your C languages do. So if you're coming from JavaScript or Java or C or anything built off of that familiar syntax, Erlang is really, really confusing to start with. You can see you get the little arrows saying, this is the body of the function. Here's the name. You've got to put in the variables. You've got to export your functions with their arity, the number of variables in them. Because if you don't do that, they're all considered private. So Elixir, familiar looking, def p to say, export this, don't export this. You're not using, not even really using the word arity to say how many arguments are in the function. So it's Erlang looks unfamiliar. And even I started Erlang 10 years ago. And if you stay away from it for a couple of months, I can tell you that you go back at it and you look at it and you go, what the hell? It is not a forgiving thing. Whereas, the Elixir, it has that foundation in Ruby syntax. Although it is different enough from Ruby that if you're coming from Ruby, you're going to get a few surprises. So this is some Erlang code. This is okay Erlang code. I had an example that was far worse, and I didn't want to scare anybody off the thing. But you can see the legibility of that initial look at it is not really high. Where Elixir hides the string structure for you, Erlang actually has two string structures in its binaries and then lists that contain whatever you want, and sometimes they're a string and sometimes they're not. Erlang is also dynamically typed, so you can use something like Dialyzer to try to make it statically typed, but it still doesn't care. So you're not getting that static typing, and I know Elixir is working towards static typing. As a dynamic typing guy, I don't like that idea at all. I like the hazards of dynamic typing. But yeah, so you can see like semicolons. Is there any commas in here? There's got to be some code with commas in here. Yeah, there's a comma in here. The differences are subtle, but you got to remember if you're switching from Erlang or coming from Elixir, Erlang, the variables are all uppercase instead of lowercase. The atoms don't have a colon in front of them. So anything that's lowercase is an atom. You get the little arrow. The list comprehensions look fairly different. You got to remember to export all your functions that you want to export, which is incredibly irritating after a while. yeah, so, and just like anonymous functions, you can, like Elixir, you can do crazy things with them. Unlike Elixir, it's not holding your hand ever. There is no consideration for your developer sensibilities that you might have developed over the years, where you go, oh, it would be nice if a language did this, and Elixir, you go, oh, that language does this. The pipe operator in Elixir, you don't get that in Erlang. Erlang is explicit. You don't get anything for free. There's no conveniences in it. And then there's the wonderful things in Elixir, like mix. Erlang uses rebar 3, although some people insist on using make. And I'm going to rant about that in a few minutes. As a guy who had to use make for a massive amount of career, I hate make. Elixir's macro functionality is really well developed, and Erlang's is not. It is very bare bones. Again, Erlang is explicit, so all those nice things, default arguments in functions, they don't exist. You got to create another function with one arity less, and then call the function with the default that's next line. And the big thing is Erlang doesn't have a Phoenix equivalent. So you will find that when you go into Erlang, there's just less for the developer there, and you're expected to do so much of it yourself. It gives you all this power and says, here's the band saw, cut your arm off. There's no guide rails. There's no little thing where the blade stops spinning if it gets an electric current through it. Nothing. So, despite that, why would you want to learn anything about Erlang? Well, again, all these things are really because Elixir uses Erlang, and eventually something will happen, and you'll have to look at Erlang code. And you'll look at it, and you'll think, maybe I'll do this tomorrow. I mean, it's a good time to take a break. When, as somebody who's written a fair bit of both, switching between them is difficult. Just that there is a context switch that you have to make between them that is really a little much. They're not they're similar in structure, but the syntactical differences are enough that you'll be sitting there in one typing in the other and not realize it, because with the structural similarities, your brain just jumps to one or the other, and you happen to be in Erlang writing Elixir code, and you don't realize it until you can't compile it. Or you're using NeoVim and your Erlang server stops working in the back end, and you can't figure out why. And then the big reason for Erlang, and this is true, Erlang developers, according to the Stack Overflow developer survey, make the most money. And they do make a lot of money. And like anything where you make a lot of money, because there's typically more demand than supply. There are not a lot of Erlang developers in the world. Considering this room of people who are interested in Elixir, I'm probably the only one that goes to Erlang first. So there's not a lot of demand, but there's a very smaller supply. And why not Erlang? Okay, now I'm going to rant. So Erlang was written by a bunch of guys who needed to solve a problem. And these were all already guys in their 40s, back in the 80s. So they were not looking to create a general language for people to use. They weren't, trying to sell anything to developers. They were creating something for them to use within their group. And when they finally got around to open sourcing it and making it available to the world, they went, okay, here it is. Use it if you want it. And people went, that's incomprehensible. Your documentation is terrible. And they went, yeah, okay. And they never put in an effort to go any further than that. If you watch Robert Verding in the last couple of years when he gives talks, he's one of the original creators of Erlang. He and Joe Armstrong and I can't remember the third guy's name were the creators of Erlang. Robert Verding will say that exactly what I had in the slide is they were solving a problem. They weren't creating a general programming language. And when they put it out there for the world to use, they didn't say, hey, can we make this more applicable to other things? Can we make this easier for developers to use? They just said, hey, if we put it out there, maybe Ericsson will, keep supporting it. So they didn't really work on any of the modern conveniences. So, everything was done in Make, and typically you had to write your own Make file because they didn't have a template to build anything. They didn't have any real web server built in. They did not adjust the language or work on parts of the language that would make it applicable to a general audience like this. And then when the new guys discovered it, they pushed back against any new ideas, really. There was a real foot dragging on it. And it wasn't until Elixir came along that they started to realize that the community, that the product is better if you make it better for the people who use it, and if you encourage people to use it by making it easier for them to use. And so Elixir just leapfrogged Erlang in community, in usage, in things like Phoenix. Phoenix came out, and then Live View. Elixir has Cowboy, which is not, or Erlang has Cowboy, which is not built in, and which, if anybody's ever tried to use it, is the most nightmarish library ever. Trying to use it will drive you to a different language. And so Phoenix was originally written on Cowboy, and I am impressed that Chris McCord managed to get Cowboy to work the way he did, but it has migrated to Bandit, which is written in Elixir. So yeah, so Elixir really has a smaller, older community of people who are, as the old guys die, what happens unfortunately for old guys, as the old guys die, the younger guys that are in the community are still in their 50s, but they are pushing things forward to try to at least keep up with what Elixir needs. I mean, Erlang, the latest release of Erlang finally got JSON support. And we're talking it's 2025, and they just put JSON support into the language. And it was written by the guy that put Elixir support, or yeah, JSON support into Elixir. So it wasn't even one of the Erlang guys that wrote it. It was an Elixir guy that wrote it for Erlang. So you can tell what kind of barriers there are to.
He's also an Erlang guy.
Is he? Okay.
He works for WhatsApp.
Okay. Because there's, like the Erlang projects I worked on, they all started around 2013. So before Elixir became big. So that's why they're written in Erlang. If they were starting now, they'd be written in Elixir. So we've got this beautiful Elixir thing, although some of the conveniences irritate me because there's too many of them, because I'm an old man, and too many conveniences confuses me. But we've got this wonderful thing, and it's written on this potentially crusty old framework underneath it. And so it's nice that Erlang is advancing now with the lower level technologies that will support Elixir. And it's nice to get that Erlang money when it's available. But it is not as friendly as it could be. But if you're going to do Elixir, you need to at least be familiar with it. And you need to be able to read its weird error messages and fight with its REPL. I mean, they just, 2 years ago, they put in the scrollback buffer in the REPL. So you didn't have to cut and paste your stuff in, so you could just tap the up arrow. I mean, after 8 years of fighting with that, I was thrilled to see that. But it's little things like that that they're finally getting around to doing. But so yeah, so I hope I've terrified you all about using Erlang. But there are parts of it like that, the pattern matching, that I find a little. Elixir is a little too Ruby-like in that you get the metaprogramming. Like, has anybody used Nimble Parsec? It's a parser combinator.
Awesome.
And it is if you can figure out the macros that are built into it, and figure out when you're calling a function and when you're invoking a macro, and what's going to happen when you get that far. So it's the nice macro system adds a layer of complexity to a library that you might not want to have to deal with, and they don't always follow the expected Elixir usage that you expect from it. So yeah, so Elixir isn't perfect, but it's certainly more approachable than Erlang. But Erlang's there; it's not going away, and it will eventually sneak up on you. But it can be fun. I came from the Java world, 20 years in Java, and I came into Erlang, and my first thought was, oh my God, I can't do this. And then after a couple of months, once you get used to that weird syntax, it's just fun to write. And I'm getting there in Elixir. I'm still not 100% because, again, Erlang's syntax is smaller than Elixir. Elixir's got all those bells and whistles that you can play with, and you need to track them all. And I'm old; I can't track all those things. But yeah, so I think just a couple of sources. If you want to learn something about Erlang, learn you some Erlang by Fred Hiive. It's a free website. You can buy one. So
it's not. I mean, they're not exactly the same. They're both doing an exploratory thing, and so they kind of explore different territory, and they cover some of the same ground.
Yeah. Oh, and another one you might want to read is Erlang in Anger, also by Fred Hiive.
Yeah.
That's a good one about using it in production and
wrong.
all those issues that you might have and how to diagnose them.
What was the name of the first book?
There's Erlang in Anger.
Which are the ones that he's on the screen?
Yeah.
The Beam book. But
Is
then
that
there's also
the name of the book?
it is.
Yes, that is the name of the book, the
Yeah.
Beam book. It is
There's
literally
one
named
called
the Beam book.
Okay.
And there's one called Beam Wisdoms,
Okay.
which is like it's just a website. Both of them are just websites. Does the Beam book actually have a physical book?
No,
I'm not sure.
no,
Do you get
it's
to
a
publish?
it's a website. You can download a PDF.
Yeah. But Learn You Some Erlang is also excellent. Like that was how I learned Erlang initially, like more than a decade ago. I don't know if it's 100% current with current Erlang.
No, it's back around release 18, 19.
But not that much has changed.
No.
So,
No, Erlang does not change quickly, so you don't
yes.
lose anything by.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Erlang is much more conservative
Yes.
than Elixir.
And if anybody needs a talk idea, Lua in Erlang or Lua now in Elixir would be a great talk idea because I don't know anything about Lua other than I've looked at it and they use it in games. So somebody needs to come and give a talk on that.
Could someone else do it? Volunteer, please.
Do you mean Luerl?
Yeah, so Luerl, but somebody just announced Lua in Elixir as well. I don't know if they're
really?
using Luerl.
Okay.
And they've just written an Elixir wrapper around it, or whether they're just.
You can run Lua now with Elixir. I think they just announced like yesterday, I think.
Okay. Cool.
And then somebody needs to give a talk on Phoenix New, which is Chris McCord's new AI Elixir development
You mean
tool.
Tidewave or?
No, Chris. I just saw.
Yeah, another one?
Yeah, it's literally called Phoenix New in it, but it's the whole word Phoenix.
Okay.
So not phx.new, which is a different website, but it's phoenix.new, and it's a AI VS Code knockoff, I think.
Okay.
And it's all in the browser, and it apparently knows Elixir better than the other guys,
Okay.
which is
would say about the prologue is that the idea with prologue is that it writes like English, right? So your sentence starts, and then you have semicolons and commas
Yes.
that divide up a sentence, and then you have a period that ends a sentence.
Yep.
So that was like the sort of logic.
Yeah.
behind
So
it. And
yeah,
it works a lot better in prologue than it does
Erlang.
in Erlang.
Erlang's big thing is functions have clauses, and that's why there's a semicolon at the end of a clause. There's a period at the end of a function.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the other thing. Going back between Elixir and Erlang, you forget to put that period on the end, and
Yeah.
Erlang hates you.
Yeah.
You put it on the end, and Elixir hates you. So,
Yeah.
so remember, if you've typed in IEX or Erl.
Yeah, to know where you're at. Another thing is that Livebook supports Erlang. So if you want to do Erlang without a lot of work, you can just go look it up in Livebook and then go ahead and type some Erlang and figure it out.
And I don't think there are quite as many Erlang releases as Elixir. So, you know, if you fall behind a couple, nobody will notice.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? All right, thank you.